Ever since Valve saw success with the Steam Deck, and let's be honest, even before that, when Nintendo saw success with the Nintendo Switch, there's been a lot of conversation about whether or not the big console makers like Microsoft and Sony were going to be either returning to the handheld market in the case of Sony, or entering the handheld market for the first time from Microsoft. In fact, we've talked about it a lot on the NerdNest podcast, and Carrie, aka The Fox, has an awesome video that kind of draws a straight line from the underpowered Series S directly to an Xbox handheld, and why he thinks that Microsoft is going to make one. And for a long time, people have been talking about whether or not that's going to happen. Well, we just had this huge leak from Microsoft, and as part of that leak, it looks like Valve has absolutely nothing to worry about. Now, before we get to the leak, let's talk about what Microsoft has actually been doing. They've been supporting third parties doing their own stuff using Windows as the basis for a PC handheld, not necessarily an Xbox handheld. And so far, there's reasons why I think that this is a good move for Microsoft, but I still hope that they'll get into the handheld race anyway. Now, let's talk about the leak real quick, because this has got to be, I mean, it's obviously the biggest leak this year, but it might be the biggest leak in video game history when it comes to what goes on behind the scenes. If you didn't know, what's happening right now is that Microsoft is trying to purchase Activision Blizzard. And as part of that, the FTC kind of got in Microsoft's way. They ended up suing Microsoft, which meant that everybody had to go to court, and that's when discovery started happening. Discovery is where they say, give us all of your information so that we can look and make sure that everything is on the up and up, and we'll, maybe or maybe not give this rubber stamp on whether or not this merger acquisition is going to go through. Well, somebody at Microsoft accidentally made a massive mistake, and they uploaded Microsoft's 10-year plan with a whole bunch of details. And when you combine that with all of the email stuff that we've been getting through this lawsuit, we have a pretty good picture of what Microsoft is planning on doing and why Valve has nothing to worry about.
Oh, nice hat. Oh, this? I'm actually not a fan. I'm wearing it to protect you. Protect me? What do you mean? Well, I just shaved and it was a really close shave. I don't think you can handle it. Handle what? I see you every single day. What's under the hat? Are you sure you want to know? Yeah, no secrets. Okay, it's your funeral. Oh my god, it's so bright! Oh my god, sorry! I usually shave about every 2 days, and I've been shaving my head for about 12 years at this point. That's to say, I shave a lot. And for years I used cheap, disposable razors. And the reason I did that was because they were cheap. But are they really cheap? Not really, because you keep throwing them away and buying new ones. That's why you gotta check out Henson Shaving. Once you own one of their razors, it only costs about $3 to $5 per year to replace the blades. Plus, they're made out of really high quality of materials. Think of a razor as a diving board. The longer that the diving board is, the more wobble it's going to have. And the more wobble that you have when you shave, the more likely you are to have nicks, cuts, and irritation. That's why Henson makes razors that only extend out to 0.0013 inches. This gives you a super stable blade, and it's really smooth. So go to hensonshaving.com and make sure that you use the code NerdNest at checkout to get 100 free blades with your purchase. Again, that's hensonshaving.com, and use NerdNest at checkout to get 100 free blades. And big thank you to Henson for sponsoring this episode.
All right, let's take a look at the actual document, and I'm not going to go through the whole thing. If I did, that would take forever, and this video would be way too long. But if we start at this page right here, we can see one piece of information that I think is very interesting. Here it says that Microsoft says that unlocking new off-console endpoints and improving the experience will substantially grow subscribers over the next 8 years. So basically they're saying, look, we want people to not think of Xbox as a system that you hook up to your TV, we want people to think of Xbox as a brand where you can play your games pretty much anywhere. And in order to grow that subscriber base, what they really want to do over the next 8 years is give people more places to play Xbox games that aren't necessarily sitting on your Series X or Series S, or the future Series X and Series S, which we will talk about later on in the video. Now, one advantage that Valve has over all of its competitors in the handheld PC space is the Steam store. It's the default place where people go to play games on PC. Sure, there's other stores available, but most people just load up Steam and they play their games through that platform. And because of that, when people do buy Windows PC handhelds like the ROG Ally or the Legion Go, they're going to be loading Steam on there and they're going to be playing games from Steam, and Valve's going to make money anyway. But there is one thing that Microsoft could do that would melt away Valve's built-in advantage in the PC handheld space. And that's if Microsoft made an Xbox console, which just seems like it's not something that they want to do. That's a good thing for us, but I also kind of want one. Now, if we look at these two slides side by side, you can see that we've got Xbox Gaming Today and Xbox Gaming Beyond. And the thing that jumps out at me the most, first anyway, is the handheld. Now, somebody might be thinking, well, okay, hold on. We already have Microsoft handhelds like the ROG Ally and the upcoming Lenovo Legion Go. So what is this talking about? Well, some people might think that they're talking about an Xbox handheld, and that's something where Valve would have to sit up and pay attention, because one of the advantages that Valve has is they have the Steam store. And if I'm playing games on my ROG Ally here, well, guess what? I'm probably playing games on Steam. Even if it's a Windows machine, I'm still playing my Steam games on my ROG Ally. And when I get my Lenovo Legion Go, I'm going to be playing Steam games on there as well. But if Microsoft made what Carrie has been talking about, essentially a portable Series S, if they did that, well, that would play Xbox games and it wouldn't play Steam games. And that would be something that Valve would absolutely have to pay attention to. And if you look at this slide, it seems like that might be what they're doing. But tune in, stay tuned, and we'll talk about why that's not something that Valve has to worry about right now. Now, if we take a look at this slide here, which is labeled Current Gaps in Fiscal Year 23 to Reach the 2030 Goals, you can see on the bottom we have all of the things that Microsoft has already funded. In the middle, we can see things that Microsoft is working on doing, and at the top, we can see the things that it looks like Microsoft is not interested in at all. And in that top section, we can see the handheld. Now, you might look at that and think, hold on, you just got done telling us that Microsoft wants to have a handheld in the Xbox Beyond slide. Yeah, I did. But if we look at this pyramid, it says not in scope for first party. That means that Microsoft doesn't want to make this thing themselves, which means, as I've said before, Valve has nothing to worry about. And here's why. Microsoft is more interested in letting third parties continue to make handhelds for them using Windows, meaning that this is not going to be an Xbox handheld. It's going to be a PC handheld that runs Windows. And all of the games that I play on my Steam Deck, I can play on a Windows handheld. Well, 99.9% of the games that I play on my Steam Deck, I can play on a Windows handheld. So that means I'm playing Steam games on this device. If Microsoft were to make it an Xbox handheld, I wouldn't be able to play my Steam games on that Xbox device. But I don't see any world where Microsoft allows some other company to make an Xbox handheld that just plays Xbox Series games. So on here, it looks like Microsoft wants to get into the handheld market, but they want to let everybody else do the work for them. Now, why would Microsoft want to allow third parties to handle all of this stuff for them when they could probably do a better job themselves? Some people might take issue with the idea that I think that Microsoft could do this better than anybody else, but I'll talk about why I think that is later on in the video. In this case, I want to talk about what benefits does Microsoft get by allowing third parties to take care of this stuff. Well, number one, they get a whole bunch of R&D for free. These other companies, they have to do all of the R&D, and Microsoft doesn't have to foot the bill. On top of that, they get to see a lot of different iterations very, very quickly. Look at how different the Lenovo Legion Go is from the Asus ROG Ally. These things are wildly different, but they both play the same games and they both run Windows. And because of this, Microsoft is going to be able to sit back and watch and see what devices appeal to which people, and which things do people care about and which things do people not care about. Plus, how much are people willing to pay for these things? Microsoft gets to get all of this information just by sitting back and watching, because they're selling their games through Windows, and it's essentially going to make Game Pass more attractive. Okay, so if Microsoft is watching what everybody's doing and just letting them do all of the hard work for them, then why do I think that it's better if Microsoft made it themselves? Well, when you have 100% control over both the hardware and the software, at the end of the day, I feel the customer gets a better experience in the end. I think that there's a lot of people who would disagree with me that Apple does this incredibly well. I love the fact that I've got iOS on my phone, iPadOS on my iPad, my tvOS, and my macOS all kind of communicating to each other and kind of giving me this ecosystem of things that work really, really well together. And that wouldn't happen if we had different operating systems on all that stuff. So for me, I think that that works incredibly well. We've also seen this with the Steam Deck. Valve's Steam Deck, they control the hardware, they control the software, and that's why it's such a great experience, because they get to make all of those decisions. One of my biggest gripes about things like the ROG Ally is the fact that this particular device runs Windows and doesn't have a controller-first interface. This is something that I think would greatly benefit almost every Windows PC handheld out there. Having a controller-first interface is key to a really great experience. In this case, Asus has tried to shoehorn on their Armory Crate software in order to make it a controller-first experience, but it always kind of falls apart, and I constantly have to go into quote-unquote desktop mode. On my Steam Deck, I only go on to desktop mode like once or twice a month, maybe, and that's only because I'm like doing weird stuff to make stuff for the videos. If I'd never made videos, there's no way I would go into desktop mode on this at all. It's just not needed. It works fine without it. Maybe once just to set up my emulation, and after that, I'd be out. Now, even though I think the best course of action would be for Microsoft to make their own handheld, it seems like they're not going to do that. But what I would really like to see, if we're not getting what I want, is instead I would really like to see Microsoft make that controller-first UI for all of these handhelds that are going to be running Windows. In fact, if they did that, I might change my tune if it was a really great interface. And honestly, they've already figured out a good way to do it with Xbox. There's one gripe that I have with the Xbox UI, and that's when you go to turn it off, you got to hold down the center button. And I think that there's better ways that they could do that. That's my only gripe with the Xbox interface. Other than that, I think that it's fine. And if they could just transplant that to Windows and say, only turn this on if you are, running on a handheld, that would be absolutely fantastic. Since we're talking about the leaks, we obviously have to talk about the new systems that are going to be hooked up to people's TVs. Now, it says here that Brooklyn is going to deliver 4K Gen 9 console gaming with more internal storage, faster Wi-Fi, reduced power, and more immersive controller and a beautiful redesign that elevates the all-digital experience of the Xbox ecosystem. I hate to break it to you, but the all-digital future that a lot of people have been worried about is here, whether you like it or not. Now, I have to admit that my PlayStation 5, I am all digital on that. My Xbox Series X, even if it has a disc slot, I'm all digital on that as well. My Steam Deck, all digital. I have like 7 or 8 Nintendo Switch games that are physical and everything else is digital. I'm fine with all digital, but I totally get why a lot of people aren't. I think that the current gen, that's it for discs. We are probably never going to be seeing physical media again when it comes to video games. And that's because physical media costs these people a lot more money. I think of it this way. Every time you go to a GameStop and pick up a used game, that's money that they're not getting. Microsoft, Nintendo, Sony, they don't get any of that money from used games. And while I like the idea of getting used games, most of the time I just buy them when they come out anyway. So I don't often spend less to get used games. So that digital stuff, it's here. We're just going to have to get used to it whether we like it or not. And somebody might say, well, I just won't buy those. Okay, well, guess what? They're not going to make physical systems for us anymore. I'm calling it now. Those are gone. I got to admit, I think the design looks kind of like the Mac trash can, which I was never really a fan of, but it's black and it's sleek and it fits under my desk, and I probably don't have, or not my desk, but my shelf over there. I don't really care what this looks like as long as it fits down in the entertainment center and I don't really have to look at it. Now, next up, I want to talk about that more immersive controller, because that piqued my interest, and I scrolled down to look at this thing, and there was like stuff on there that I think is really good and stuff that I think is really bad. So let's start with the good and we'll talk about the bad. Number one, a lot of you probably don't know, but this channel started out as a podcast about Google Stadia. And the thing that Google had, there was a huge advantage over everybody else in the cloud space, was that their controller was a Wi-Fi controller. Basically, you connected it to Wi-Fi, and then it used your Wi-Fi connection to connect directly to Google's servers. This reduced the latency and made Google Stadia feel way more responsive than everything else out there. Now, I will say that GeForce Now seems to have caught up thanks to their higher refresh rates, but I still think that in terms of latency, the one that felt better than everything else was Google Stadia. And I've often said that the thing that everybody needs to do in order to match the latency that Google Stadia had is make a Wi-Fi controller, and this controller essentially is a cloud gaming controller. It connects directly to Microsoft servers, so it's going to get rid of a lot of the latency that you feel when you're playing games on xCloud. Then they have new modular thumbsticks. Now, it doesn't seem like this is something that can be removed like in the DualSense Edge, and I don't know how Microsoft would design a controller that could do that easily, because we have to remember that the reason it's easy on a DualSense Edge is because both of the sticks are down at the bottom of the controller, and Microsoft has one of the controllers up on the upper left. So I don't think it works like that. They do say that they have improved longevity. They don't say anything about whether or not these are Hall effect sensors. Fingers crossed that they are, but we will see. Then they say in here that we've got precision haptic feedback, so kind of like what we see in the DualSense controller and the Nintendo Switch. I think that that's fantastic. Not much more to say about that, but then they say an accelerometer. The accelerometer, a lot of people are probably looking at that and thinking, hey, this is really great news, because the only controller from the big three that doesn't have motion controls is Xbox. Well, I gotta say, this I think is disappointed. Unless I'm wrong about this, I believe that an accelerometer and a gyroscope are very different things, and they don't work the same way. Think of an accelerometer as the original Wii remote. And if you ever played Skyward Sword on the original Wii, you had to get an add-on that clipped onto the back of your controller, on the bottom of your controller, that had a gyroscope that made it way more accurate. So while I have long been a fan of motion controls in games, especially for aiming with gyro, I don't think that that's going to happen here. And I feel like Microsoft is just making a half commitment to getting motion controls in games. And I'm not sure why. Now, forever ago, I interviewed John Justice, the head of Google Stadia and a VP at Google, and we talked about whether or not gyroscope was going to be in the Stadia controllers. And he said that he didn't think that that was something that people wanted. And it feels like this is the same thing from Microsoft, that they feel like people don't want it. And I feel like even Sony, which has these, most of their first-party games don't even take advantage of them. So maybe they're right about that, but I know that I want gyroscope, and that's one of the things that I love about the Steam Deck, and one of the things I love about the Steam controller is the fact that I can use gyroscope for motion control aiming. Microsoft just is still holding us back. And I think if Microsoft came along and joined the party, that more games would support gyroscope because it's on all of the systems. Now, the last thing that I want to say about the cloud-first nature of this controller before we move on to the other good stuff is the fact that this blue graph right here is showing what Microsoft wants to happen between now and 2030. If you look at this, you can see that the portion of Microsoft's revenue that is blue, that is cloud-based, is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And this is something that Microsoft obviously sees as a very important thing for the future of their platform. It are these endpoints that they want to get people away from just playing on the console and think of Xbox as a destination that is available wherever you are. And if you go back to this current gaps in their plan, they have new cloud server blade, possibly based on the Brooklyn Xbox. So I do think that we're going to see more Xbox cloud stuff. But one thing that I think will continue to hold them back, even though they're getting this new cloud controller, is the fact, and hopefully I'm not wrong about this, but I don't think you can buy games and then stream them. You can only stream Game Pass games. And while I understand why Microsoft would want to do that, because it allows them to, push people towards that subscription, I do think in addition to that, people like the idea of being able to play anything. And if a game is not on Game Pass, but I want to play it, then I feel like I have to buy an Xbox. And somebody might say, well, Bill, maybe Microsoft wants you to buy an Xbox. And I'm sure that they would like me to buy an Xbox, but I think that they'd rather have a subscriber instead of somebody who bought a thing to put underneath a TV. But now that Sony and Nintendo and even Valve know all of Microsoft's plans for the next 8 years, what do I think that Valve should do about that? Well, it depends on what you're talking about. In the handheld space, I don't think Valve really has to do much of anything. They're doing great with the Steam Deck, and I think it's going to continue to do really well. I do want to see updates on it in the future, but I'm sure Valve is already going to do that anyway. What I would like to see them do is build a console that comes with the Steam Controller 2 that has all of the things that the Steam Deck has, but just removes the screen and the APU and makes it, smaller form factor, but has all that stuff. I think that would be really, really compelling. But on top of that, I would like that Steam Controller 2 to have a cloud functionality and have Valve also build a streaming platform so that even if I don't have super beefy PC or even Valve's console that I'm talking about, that I could stream the games that I'm buying from Valve on that device without having to go to like a third party like GeForce Now, which I'm a huge fan of, but there's a lot of games that just aren't on that service that I think that Valve could get on their service. And if they did that, they could also slow down how often they would need to refresh the Steam Deck, because they'd be able to stream those games at 720p on this screen with like really great reflections and ray tracing and all that stuff if the computing's being done at Valve servers and then being streamed to my Steam Deck. I would probably never feel like I would need to upgrade until we had like a better screen or something like that. But what do you guys think about the Xbox leaks? Do you think Microsoft is going to make their own handheld, or do you think they're just going to continue to let companies like Asus and Lenovo continue to take care of that for them? Should Valve respond? And if they should, how should they respond? Let me know in the comments section down below. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe. From the Nerd Nest, I'm Bill. Stay rad, everybody.